Hello and welcome. Following on from the unhappy relationship that London Transport had had with the DMS class fleet lines, they had hoped that all their one-man operated double-decker bus requirements would be met by the Leyland Titan. Now, London Transport loved the Titan because it ticked a lot of boxes of the things that they liked. And I'm sure when they first turned up that people were thinking that there could be another potential DMS saga unfolding, with London Transport doing a U-turn and getting rid of vast quantities of Titans within a 5-year period, but this didn't happen. However, as we all know, the Titan story is a little bit more complicated, and due to various hiccups with production, construction and deliveries were very slow, and this opened the door for the MCW Metrobus. London Transport had been very impressed with the Metrobus's predecessor, the MD class Metropolitan, so it was only natural that the Metrobus would find a place in London Transport's hearts. With all the delays with the production of the Titan, Leyland had lost the expected massive Titan orders from the rest of the UK bus operators, and this was PTEs such as Manchester, West Yorkshire and West Midlands, and I have done a video on the Greater Manchester Titans where I mentioned the vast numbers of buses that these PTEs were going to order. Then on top of that you had Greater Glasgow, which became Strathclyde, and the Scottish Bus Group and the National Bus Company wanting to take trial batches. All but penny numbers of these orders were cancelled, and this would leave London Transport as almost the only customer for the Leyland Titan. Now, as we've seen in other videos, especially the one of the front entrance rear-engined Routemaster, FRM1, it doesn't always pay to manufacture buses for one operator, especially in this day and age. Being overly complicated and built to a height of 14'6", the Titan had very little appeal to other operators. What was needed was something a little bit more simple that could also be adapted and used as a lower height vehicle, say something around 13'8", to replace the ageing Bristol VRT and the Daimler fleet line, as well as the Leyland Olympian. By the late 1970s, Leyland were working on something called the B45 project. Whereas the Titan had been designed to be an integrally built vehicle, the B45 was to be a separate chassis with a body built on top of it. This of course would give the new chassis a much wider appeal, as it could be bodied by a bodybuilder of your choice. And when it came to export, you could just export the chassis and it would support local industry in the country that you were sending it to, because again, they could build the bodywork that they wanted. It was also a lot cheaper to ship out chassis than it was to ship out whole buses. The B45 would eventually emerge as the Leyland Olympian, and despite sharing some mechanical similarities with the Titan, it would go on to become its own well-loved and well-respected bus. I suppose in layman's terms, if you was to describe the Olympian, you could say it was what would happen if you bred a Bristol VR with a Leyland Titan. Now, London Transport showed little or no interest in the Leyland Olympian when it first appeared. Remember, at that point, it was less than a decade since they'd had their fingers burnt with the untried and untested DMS fleet lines. However, with Leyland looking at winding down and finishing the production of the Titan, London Transport decided in 1984 to test various types of newer double-decker buses. And this would be the Alternative Vehicle Evaluation Trials. There would be 3 Dennis Dominators, 3 Volvo Ailsas, 2 Mark II Metrobuses and 3 Leyland Olympians. And if you'd like me to do a video on these AVE trials, please comment down below, because it was a very interesting time in London Transport history. The 3 Leyland Olympians for the AVE trials started to arrive in February 1984. They were given the fleet numbers of L1 to L3 and the registrations of A101 SYE to A103 SYE, and there were a couple of differences across the buses. As new, L1 was delivered with a TL11 engine and a hydrocyclic gearbox, and this was initially delivered to Chiswick. L2 and L3 were both fitted with Gardner 6LXB engines and Voith gearboxes, with L3 also being delivered to Chiswick whilst L2 was delivered to Aldenham. All three buses featured bodywork built by Eastern Coachworks of Lowestoft and seated 47 seats upstairs and 28 seats downstairs with dual doors. The bodywork was very similar to that of the Leyland Titan. Indeed, to most uninitiated bus passengers who tend not to notice the bus they're travelling on, they probably thought that they were actually an updated version of the Titan. However, of course, there were differences between these and the Titans, the front-mounted radiator being one and of course the BET style windscreen being fitted, as opposed to the Titans and the Metro buses which had the favoured London Transport barrel windscreens. The lower deck side windows weren't quite as deep as those fitted to the Titan, and the small window between the stairwell and the driver's cab on the offside was a little bit bigger than the one fitted to the Titan. However, from the rear there was no mistaking that these were totally different to the T-Class Leyland Titans, as these had a proper back window rather than the deeply recessed little square offset window that they'd had. The three buses were delivered in all over London Transport red with no white relief. Interestingly, despite being built at Lowestoft, they were painted at Workington by Leyland. Despite these buses being to a slightly higher build and having dual doors, they were more in common with the National Bus Company Leyland Olympians than to anything running in the London Transport fleet at that time. And talking about height, they were slightly lower than a Leyland Titan. The Titans were 14'6", whereas these were 14'2". The AVE Trials would see them working out of Stockwell on routes 170 during the week and route 44 on Sunday. These buses would remain at Stockwell until August 1986. London Transport had become London Buses in April 1985, and they must have been relatively impressed with these Leyland Olympians, because in June 1985 they announced that they would be ordering 260 Olympians with Eastern Coachworks bodywork. Now, this couldn't have come at a better time for ECW, because they were running a little bit low on orders, and there was a very strong possibility that the factory would have needed to have closed. In fact, had this order not been received when it was, the factory may have closed a lot earlier than it did in the end. Leyland had worked very hard to win this big order from London Buses, and it still came as a surprise at the fact that Leyland had not received an order from London Buses or its predecessor London Transport for 2 years, and it was expected that Metro Camel Weyman would have at least got a share of the business with their Metro buses. And it was quite fitting towards the end of Eastern Coachworks that this was the largest order that they'd ever received to supply one bus operator. These 260 production London Leyland Olympian buses were very similar to the three supplied in 1984 for the AVE Trials. They were based on the standard Eastern Coachworks design for the model in 9.6 metre length and featured a height again of 14'2". They also featured a 2-doorway layout. Now, whilst the first three buses for the AVE Trials had been 75-seaters, the production buses would become 68-seaters, with 42 upstairs and 26 downstairs. This reduction being a result of some of the modifications which were being related to the human factors and design research study that had been commissioned by London Transport way back in 1983. This would see DMS 2456 rebuilt to a similar interior design as to these L-Class Leyland Olympians, and these would include features that would become standard on all step entrance buses in London up until the advent of the low floor era. Indeed, this DMS would actually be used on the AVE Trials alongside the other vehicles. This would see things like the split front entrance, with the rearward half of the front entrance being lower to aid entrance of the bus for people with mobility issues. The front doors were of a double jackknife type and opened towards the middle of the doorway, in a very similar way to those on the early DMS class fleet lines, the ones that had been fitted with the automatic fare collection equipment. The central exit had 3 shallow steps and single-piece glider doors. The buses would also be fitted with a straight, forward ascending staircase, and this new design feature was so long that it eliminated the little short window bay that was behind the driver's cab, this now being moved towards the rearward side of the staircase. Most of these buses would be delivered in all over red. I think it's fair to say that these buses would always be south of the river buses, or should that be south of the river buses? Upon delivery, they were stored at various South London garages until needed. They entered service at Plumstead, Sidcup and Bexley Heath. However, they would later see service at New Cross, Norwood, Croydon, Streatham and Clapham. 10 of the batch would be fitted with coach seating for such things as the X68, which ran out of Norwood, Plumstead's 177 Express and various private hire jobs out at Camberwell. The ones allocated to Selkent, L260 to 264, featured a broad white band with bold Selkent travel in blue. Indeed, L263, which was delivered with the registration of D263 FUL, would feature the last Eastern Coachworks bodywork built, in addition to being the last of the batch. Whilst this special bus was being built at Eastern Coachworks, the staff had the idea of all of them signing the inner panels before the outer panels were fitted. So if anyone took the panels off the bus, they would see all the names and the signatures of the people that built it. That was a very nice touch, isn't it? And it begs the question, are those signatures still there on the bus? Whilst it was being finished off at Eastern Coachworks, somebody put a piece of cardboard in the upper deck front window with the message, "Lucky Last." And when it came to 263, I guess this was true, as she's now safely in preservation. But prior to this, she was Plumstead Garage's show bus and was used at various bus rallies and events across the southeast. She was later re-registered with the registration of VLT9 from RM9. This bus would be delivered in January 1987, and in keeping with a lot of the coach seating ones, within a few months of it being delivered, it was shipped off to Chiswick to be fitted with a high-speed diff. The L-Class Olympians settled down to an almost tedious, boring, everyday life. When privatisation came along, though, they found themselves in other operators' hands. Many of the Selkent allocated L-Class Olympians were transferred over to Thornton Heath and Croydon before privatisation. This would leave Plumstead and Catford with the allocation of Ls when Stagecoach took over in 1994. And these would continue to be used on routes like the 47 and the 136, where they intermixed with Leyland Titans, up until the change to low-floor buses in the year 2000. Several were then single-doored and transferred to other Stagecoach subsidiaries, such as Stagecoach East Kent, more on that later, and some to Middle and Red South. However, many went over to Enzyme Bus for resale. And these ex-Selkent buses would find a wide range of homes, from companies like Turonian, Blackburn Transport, Phoenix Student Travel in Chelmsford, and some even going to the Isle of Man. The former Selkent buses that had transferred over to Croydon and Thornton Heath would join others that were based at Norwood, Clapham and Streatham. However, the Streatham ones were reallocated when Streatham Garage was to close. At privatisation, all this was to pass to Cowie Group's South London operations and would feature Cowie's yellow Go Faster stripes at the rear of the bus. However, Cowie would eventually morph into Arriva, who would replace this livery with their Cowhorn livery. And this was a predominantly red livery with 2 cream, what looked like cow horns either side of the bus. Arriva were very keen on refurbishing old London Transport buses. They did this not only with the L-Class but also with the M Metro buses as well. 41 Olympians were refurbished at the Enfield Repair Centre during the year 2000. During this overhaul they would receive new Voith gearboxes, a new brighter interior lighting, a retrim with blue Arriva maquette which replaced the Misha black multicoloured maquette. The green handrails were now painted yellow, and the famous London Transport slatted Treadmaster flooring was replaced by black non-slip flooring. These refurbished buses all entered service at Norwood and were for the 2, the N2 and the 249. With the advent of low-floor buses, some of the L-class Olympians were moved on to Brixton and Beddington Farm. But the onward and relentless march of these low-floor buses would eventually see the end of these Leyland Olympians. But Arriva wasn't quite ready to say au revoir to the Olympian just yet, because Arriva the Shires took some of the L-class Olympians from 2003 to operate the 310 and the 311 from Hertford to Waltham Cross, with the majority of these being painted into the standard livery of Arriva's turquoise and cream. Again, though, these survived until around the 2005 mark, where they would be dispersed to many new owners. My own personal connection with the L-class Olympians was when I was driving in London for London Central. I would see them on the 136, which of course was operated by Stagecoach Selkent. I'd also see the Cowie livery on the ones that sometimes would pop up on the 37, but most of the time the 37 was Metrobus allocated. In the year 2000 I moved down to Thanet to carry on driving buses, but this time for Stagecoach East Kent. And we had 4 of them there. And these would be the former L120, L122, L126 and L134. And these things were incredibly slow. They really were. In fact, it was agreed that they wouldn't be used on the all-day Canterbury services, and they normally trundled round the Isle of Thanet coast between Margate, Ramsgate and Minnie's Bay. However, one of these number 9 Minnie's Bay duties would also do a Canterbury out and back first thing in the morning. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that the time the bus was due at Sturry railway crossing, which was about 2/3 of the way across on the route, it was the time that you were meant to be coming back the opposite direction at the same point. They all seemed to have a top speed of about 36 miles an hour, which may have been all right on London's city streets, but in rural Kent it wasn't really great. Plus they were single-doored, and the split-level entrance step used to extend into the lower saloon floor, and this would cause a lot of people to literally stack it down the step. Within a fairly short time they were all transferred down to Aldershot, and I'm not sure how Aldershot coped with them, to be fair. It would be interesting to find out if you were in the Aldershot area and you remember driving or being stuck behind an incredibly slow Leyland Olympian. By 2004-2005 though, they had all been withdrawn and had passed into other ownership. And it's a shame they weren't fitted with high-speed diffs, because they actually weren't that bad to drive, to be fair. They'd been converted to semi-automatic, which meant that you could get away from bus stops fairly quickly if you went through the gears fast enough, but it was just that low top speed that caught you out. Ironically, years later we would go on to acquire a Leyland Titan T553, and this is also fitted with a low speed diff, although the Leyland Titan does manage to get to the dizzy heights of 41 miles an hour. But don't let my tales of woe put you off, because they are actually really good buses, and this was proven by when they came out of service. They were snapped up by countless operators around the country, as you can see by the pictures in the video. Companies such as Ipswich Transport, Truronian, Blackpool Transport and Confidence of Leicester proved how good they were, and these continued to operate for many years with 3rd, 4th and sometimes 5th owners. Plus on top of that there are many in preservation, including, as I mentioned earlier on, the last bus built by Eastern Coachworks, L263. Some were also open-topped or part open-topped, which also extended their lives even further. And let's be honest, if you're going to have an open top, you might as well have something classy like this, mightn't you? Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at this rather special class of London Transport London Buses bus. If you did enjoy this video, please show your appreciation by liking and sharing it amongst your unsuspecting friends and family out there. I'm sure they will absolutely love being spammed by you sending them bus videos, especially if they're not into buses. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my future releases in this and my other series here on sunny YouTube. Also, don't forget to comment and share your memories of the L-Class Leyland Olympians. Did you travel on them? Did you drive them? Did you notice how slow they were? Also, what buses would you like me to do next in the London Transport series? We've done the Titan, and I will try and put a link into that if I remember, which 9 times out of 10, to be fair, I don't. And we've done the Metro bus, but maybe we could do the other vehicles of the AVE Trials. What do you think? Comment down below and let me know. Once again, thank you so very much for watching and making this channel the success that it has been. Without you watching the videos, there really would be no point in me sitting here talking away into a microphone. I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.